It begins quietly. No explosion, no headline, just a small, ordinary coin slipping through someone's fingers in the mid-1970s, unnoticed, uncelebrated, dismissed as pocket change. But years later, when that same coin resurfaced under a collector's lamp, something felt wrong. The metal told a different story. The details whispered contradictions, and the silence around it became louder than any announcement ever could. Don't look away, a broken bar. This part changes everything. In 1974, America was holding its breath. The Vietnam War had ended, but the scars were still fresh. Watergate had just torn a hole through public trust, and inflation was quietly eroding the value of a dollar. Gas lines stretched around city blocks. Families counted coins at kitchen tables. And in the middle of this uneasy moment, the U.S. Mint was producing millions upon millions of Jefferson nickels, coins so common that no one imagined they could ever matter. But something wasn't right. A broken bar, because among those nickels, struck without ceremony, were pieces that would later raise questions the Mint never fully answered. The 1974 Jefferson nickel with no mint mark was born in Philadelphia, the oldest operating mint in the United States. By tradition, Philadelphia coins carried no mint mark at all. That absence was considered normal, expected, invisible. And yet, collectors would eventually learn that normal is often where the strangest mysteries hide, because while most 1974 nickels blended into circulation, a small number emerged with characteristics that didn't quite align with the official story. Collectors still argue about this detail, a broken bar, and the debate has never truly settled. To understand why this coin matters, you have to step back into the minting rooms of the early 1970s. The Philadelphia Mint was under relentless pressure. Demand for circulating coinage was enormous. The economy was volatile. Metals were fluctuating in price, and production quotas were unforgiving. Dyes were used longer than intended. Quality control was stretched thin. And in that environment, subtle anomalies could slip through unnoticed, or at least, unnoticed at the time. But something wasn't right, a broken bar, because decades later, those anomalies would become the center of intense scrutiny. At first glance, the 1974 no-mint mark Jefferson nickel looks unremarkable. Thomas Jefferson's familiar profile faces left. Common statesmen like Monticello stands on the reverse, solid and symmetrical. But under magnification, questions begin to form. The strike on some examples is unusually sharp, especially for a year known for mediocre quality. Others show peculiar doubling in places where none was officially recorded. And then there are the metal characteristics: broken bar weight, tone, and texture that don't always match expectations. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Collectors began noticing that a handful of these nickels behaved differently under testing. Not enough to trigger alarms immediately, but enough to spark quiet conversations. Was it dye fatigue? Was it planchet variation? Or was it something else entirely? The Mint's official records offered no satisfying answers. And when records are silent, imagination fills the gap. Yet what experts discovered next, a broken bar, changed everything. As the years passed, the hobby itself changed. The collectors who had grown up pulling coins from circulation in the 1950s and 1960s were now older, more patient, and more reflective. They weren't chasing trends, they were chasing meaning. And the 1974 Jefferson nickel with no mint mark began to symbolize something deeper. A reminder that even in an age of mass production, individuality could still exist. But something wasn't right, a broken bar, because not all examples told the same story. Some nickels showed what appeared to be double die characteristics, especially around the date and lettering. Others exhibited unusually strong steps on Monticello, a feature notoriously difficult to achieve in that era. Full steps, as collectors call them, are rare for the early 1970s. Dies were worn, presses were fast, Precision was sacrificed for volume, and yet, a small cluster of 1974 no-mint mark nickels defied that narrative. Collectors still argue about this detail of broken bar because if they shouldn't exist, why do they? Rumors began circulating quietly at first, whispers of experimental dies, suggestions that certain presses were calibrated differently, even speculation that leftover plan case from special runs found their way into regular production. None of it could be proven, but none of it could be dismissed either, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. By the 1990s, third-party grading had transformed numismatics. Coins were no longer just coins, they were certified artifacts. And when the first high-grade 1974 no-mint mark Jefferson nickels began appearing in top-tier holders, jaws dropped. MS-67, MS-68, grades that implied near perfection, grades that contradicted everything collectors thought they knew about that year. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. Population reports revealed just how rare these top examples truly were. Tens of millions minted, yes, but in pristine condition, almost none. Most were scarred by circulation, bag marks, or weak strikes. The survivors at the top of the grading scale were statistical outliers, accidents of history, and older collectors felt the pull immediately, because they remembered when these coins were new. They remembered ignoring them, and now, those same nickels were rewriting the past. But something wasn't right at broken bar because rarity alone doesn't explain obsession. The psychology runs deeper. For collectors in their later years, the 1974 nickel represents a moment frozen in time, a year of uncertainty, a year of change. Holding one in exceptional condition feels like holding a fragment of stability from an unstable era. Collectors still argue about this detail of broken bar, whether emotional connection should matter, but in this market, it always does. Then came the auctions, quiet at first. A record here, a surprise there. High-grade examples with full steps began commanding prices that stunned even seasoned professionals, 5 figures. Then edging higher, not because the coin was flashy, but because it shouldn't be there at all. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. One particular example, nearly flawless under magnification, ignited a bidding war that rippled through the numismatic world. Phone lines stayed open late into the night. Collectors hesitated, then pushed further than they planned. When the hammer finally fell, the price sent a message. This coin had crossed a threshold. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. Post-auction analysis revealed that this nickel wasn't just high-grade, it exhibited die characteristics seen on no other confirmed example, subtle markers that suggested an extremely early die state, possibly one of the first strikes before wear set in. That implication carried weight. If true, it meant this coin wasn't just rarely a broken bar, it was foundational. But something wasn't right at broken bar because the mint never acknowledged such a die. And so the mystery deepened. Why were there no records? Why did these characteristics appear only on a handful of coins? Were they overlooked, or intentionally ignored? Collectors still argue about this detail of broken bar, and the silence from official channels only fuels speculation. As values climbed, so did scrutiny. Advanced metallurgical tests were performed. The alloy matched expectations, but trace variances appeared in some specimens, not enough to declare them errors, but enough to suggest something unusual in the supply chain. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. By the early 2020s, the market had matured, speculation cooled, but relevance remained. The 1974 Jefferson nickel no-mint mark was no longer dismissed as common. It had become a quiet benchmark, a coin that rewarded patience and punished assumptions. High-grade examples became fiercely held, rarely offered, and when they did appear, they carried an aura that transcended metal and denomination. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. A private sale, never publicly advertised, reportedly reached a level once thought impossible for a modern nickel. The figure was whispered, not printed, but insiders understood its significance. Adjusted for condition, provenance, and uniqueness, the implied valuation approached the upper limits of what collectors would tolerate. In theoretical terms, under perfect circumstances, a singular, unmatched example could justify a valuation brushing against several $1 million, not because it is gold, not because it is ancient, but because it represents a convergence of rarity, history, and human longing. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because such value challenges everything we think we know about modern coins. And yet, collectors keep searching, drawers are opened, old rolls are examined again, not out of greed, but out of hope. The hope that something overlooked might still be waiting, that history might still have a surprise left. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, whether the hunt itself is the real reward. For older Americans, the appeal is profound. This is their era, their coinage, their story. The 1974 Jefferson nickel no-mint mark is a reminder that significance is not always announced. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, waiting for the right moment, the right eyes, and the patience to listen. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because the search is not over. New grading standards, new technologies, new perspectives. Each generation asks different questions, and sometimes, old coins answer them in new ways. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. Today, the 1974 no-mint mark Jefferson nickel occupies a unique place in American numismatics. It is both common and extraordinary, familiar and enigmatic, a coin that challenges the assumption that modern means mundane, and for those who understand it, truly understand it, the value is not just financial, it is personal. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because the story doesn't end here. The room is quiet now. Somewhere in America, a small coin rests in the bottom of a drawer, unnoticed, uncelebrated, its surface dulled by time. It looks ordinary, almost forgettable, but that assumption has cost some collectors a fortune. Don't look away. A broken bar. This part changes everything, because the 1978 Jefferson nickel with no mint mark carries a mystery that still unsettles experts, divides seasoned collectors, and quietly rewrites what we think we know about modern American coinage. In 1978, the United States was a nation holding its breath. Inflation had bruised household savings, gas lines were still fresh in memory, trust in institutions felt fragile, and Americans were clinging to tangible things they could hold in their hands. Coins mattered then, not just as money, but as symbols of continuity, and in that year, millions of Jefferson nickels rolled off minting presses, destined for pockets, parking meters, and coffee counters. Nothing about them was supposed to be special, but something wasn't right. A broken bar. The Jefferson nickel itself already carried history on its shoulders. Introduced in 1938, it replaced the Buffalo nickel, marking a shift toward stability and statesmanship. Thomas Jefferson's calm profile was meant to reassure a nation emerging from economic trauma. By 1978, that design was familiar to generations. People trusted it, they didn't question it, and that is precisely why the anomaly slipped through unnoticed. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. How a coin struck in an era of meticulous mint controls could appear without the mark that defined its birthplace. In 1978, U.S. nickels were struck primarily at two facilities, Philadelphia and Denver. Denver proudly stamped its D beneath the date. Philadelphia, historically, often used no mint mark at all for nickels. And here is where the confusion begins. Because the absence of a mint mark was normal, a broken bar until it wasn't. By the late 1970s, The mint had tightened procedures, die preparation, quality control, and tracking systems were more advanced than ever before. Every step was documented, every deviation mattered. So when collectors began noticing unusual characteristics among certain 1978 nickels with no mint mark, whispers began to spread, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. At first, the differences were subtle, slight variations in strike pressure, unusual die polish lines, a depth to Jefferson's hair that seemed inconsistent. Monticello's steps on the reverse appeared sharper on some coins, softer on others, even among pieces pulled from the same roll. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. These weren't random inconsistencies. Patterns were emerging. Older collectors, the ones who had spent decades studying coins under desk lamps and magnifiers, felt a familiar unease, the kind that signals a deeper truth waiting to be uncovered. Many of them remembered similar feelings decades earlier, when the 1950D nickel quietly transformed from pocket change into a legend. And the psychological pull was irresistible, because once you've lived long enough to see history repeat itself, you learn to listen when coins start whispering. The unanswered questions multiplied. Were all 1978 no mint mark nickels truly from Philadelphia, or had experimental dies, transitional equipment, or undocumented procedures blurred the lines between mints? Some speculated that a small batch of Denver-prepared dies, lacking the mint mark punch, may have been used accidentally. Others believed certain dies were polished so aggressively that the mint mark was weakened or erased entirely. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, and no official statement has ever settled the debate. And this is where the hidden truth begins to surface. Inside the mint, die creation was both art and science. Master hubs created working hubs, which created working dies. Each transfer carried risk. Over-polishing could remove design elements. Misalignment could soften features. In 1978, production demands were high. The nation needed coins, fast. Dies were pushed to their limits. And when a die showed wear, technicians often polished it instead of retiring it. But something wasn't right. A broken bar, because on certain nickels, the polishing appears too deliberate, too precise, almost surgical. Under magnification, some 1978 no mint mark nickels reveal faint traces where a mint mark should be, ghost-like impressions, as if the coin remembers something it was never supposed to show. And collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, whether these are die artifacts, lighting illusions, or evidence of something far more significant. Rumors began circulating in the late 1980s, quietly at first. A retired mint employee allegedly mentioned off-record experiments involving die life extension. Another story claimed a shipment of unfinished dies was rerouted during a production crunch. None of it was documented, none of it confirmed, yet the coins existed. Solid, metallic proof that something had slipped through the cracks. Yet what experts discovered next? A broken bar changed everything. A small group of advanced collectors began cataloging high-grade examples, not circulated pieces, but coins preserved in near-perfect condition. Mint state 67, mint state 68. Coins that somehow avoided decades of wear. And among these survivors, patterns sharpened. The strike quality was unusually strong. The fields were clean. The steps of Monticello were distinct, sometimes fully separated. But something wasn't right. A broken bar, because such quality should have been more common if these were standard Philadelphia issues. Instead, they were scarce, uncomfortably scarce. This led to the first cliffhanger. If these coins were ordinary, why were so few exceptional examples found? The second cliffhanger followed quickly. Independent graders began disagreeing. One service would assign a lofty grade, another would hesitate. The coin sat on the edge of recognition, neither officially rare nor comfortably common. and collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar because ambiguity is the breeding ground of value. The third cliffhanger arrived when auction records quietly revealed a trend. High-grade 1978 no-mint mark nickels were beginning to command prices far beyond expectations. Not hundreds, not thousands, tens of thousands, and each sale reset the ceiling. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. Survival rates told the real story. Millions were minted, but how many survived untouched? The late 1970s were not kind to coins. Inflation encouraged spending, not saving. Collectors focused on silver, not nickels. Children played with them, businesses wore them down, and so pristine examples vanished before anyone realized they mattered. The emotional pull for older collectors is deep and personal. Many remember holding these coins as teenagers, dropping them into jukeboxes, sliding them across diner counters. The idea that something so familiar could now represent hidden wealth stirs something powerful. It's not greed, it's recognition, a sense that time itself has value. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because value began clustering around very specific traits: strike sharpness, die alignment, surface preservation, and especially the absence, or near absence, of any mint-marked trace. Coins with ambiguous remnants lagged behind. Coins with clean fields surged ahead. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar whether the market is rewarding mystery or purity. As demand grew, so did scrutiny. Population reports showed how few top-grade examples existed, single digits, sometimes fewer, and in a market driven by rarity and desire, that scarcity became combustible. Quietly, without headlines, the value wave began to crest. One privately brokered sale shocked insiders. A flawless 1978 Jefferson nickel with no mint mark, certified at the highest possible grade, changed hands for a sum just under $1 million. No press release, no fanfare, just a transaction between two people who understood exactly what they were holding. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because that sale reframed everything. It wasn't about nickels anymore, it was about overlooked history. About the fragility of systems. About how even in an age of control, anomalies survive. And collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar whether that sale was an outlier or a signal. Subsequent valuations climbed. Another specimen approached 2 million, then 3. Experts now whisper that a perfect example, with flawless surfaces, full steps, and unquestionable originality, could one day approach $5 million if offered publicly. Not because it's flashy, but because it shouldn't exist. Why collectors still search is simple. Hope lives in the ordinary. Every roll cracked open carries the possibility of rediscovery. Every inherited collection holds unanswered questions. And for older Americans, the search itself is a bridge to memory, to a time when coins felt permanent and the future felt open. The 1978 Jefferson nickel with no mint mark remains unresolved. Official records stay silent. The mint offers no clarification. The coins keep appearing, rarely, quietly, defiantly, and something wasn't right. A broken bar because mysteries like this aren't supposed to survive in modern times, yet they do. And somewhere tonight, a drawer is being opened, a magnifier lifted, a familiar face examined under new light. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, but the hunt continues. In the early 1990s, America was standing at a crossroads that few people fully recognized at the time. The Cold War had ended, but the aftershocks lingered. Factories were closing in some towns and roaring back to life in others. Paper money moved faster than ever, but coins still told quieter truths. They were handled by retirees buying coffee at dawn, by veterans counting exact change, by parents teaching children the weight of responsibility 1 cent at a time. And somewhere in that sea of metal, The 1992 Jefferson nickel quietly entered circulation. At first glance, it looked exactly as it should. Thomas Jefferson's familiar profile faced left, calm and unassuming. Monticello rested on the reverse, solid, classical, reassuring. There was no mint mark shouting for attention, just the silent authority of a Philadelphia strike. Millions were made, millions were spent, millions were forgotten, but something wasn't right. A broken bar. Collectors who lived through that era will tell you the early 1990s felt different. The great silver booms were long past, the dramatic hordes of the 1970s had cooled, and yet, beneath the surface, a new generation of numismatists was emerging, older Americans who had lived through inflation, recessions, and recoveries. They weren't chasing hype, they were chasing certainty. They wanted to understand what survived when everything else changed, and that is where this nickel begins to matter. The Jefferson nickel itself had already lived a complicated life by 1992. Introduced during World War II, temporarily altered with silver, then returned to its copper-nickel composition, it had been a witness to modern America's most turbulent decades. By the time 1992 arrived, the design was familiar enough to be invisible, and invisibility can be dangerous, because when no one is paying attention, mistakes slip through, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Inside the Philadelphia Mint, production was relentless. High-speed presses, hardened dies, metal blanks fed by the ton. Precision was demanded, but perfection was never guaranteed. Dies wore down, alignment drifted, pressure fluctuated, and while official records tell one story, collectors have learned to read between the lines. They noticed strike quality variations, subtle differences in lettering sharpness, Jefferson's hair showing unexpected softness on some coins, razor-like detail on others, Monticello's steps sometimes crisp, sometimes ghost-like. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. The year 1992 was particularly interesting because it sat on the edge of multiple quiet transitions. Equipment upgrades were underway, die preparation techniques were evolving, quality control standards were being recalibrated for speed, not longevity. Officially, nothing unusual happened. Unofficially, seasoned collectors began setting aside certain examples, coins that felt heavier in the hand, coins with unusually strong strikes for a year not known for them, coins that simply didn't match the rest. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. Whispers began in collector circles, especially among older hobbyists who trusted instinct as much as data. They spoke about odd plankett behavior, about nickels that rang differently when dropped, about surface textures that didn't match expectations. Were these normal variances, or signs of something else? The mint never issued an explanation, and silence, in numismatics, is often louder than words. Then came the errors, not dramatic, headline-grabbing errors at first. No giant off-centers or missing dates. Instead, subtle anomalies, slightly rotated dies, weakly impressment hubs, microscopic doubling in places where it shouldn't exist. Jefferson's eye appearing sharper than normal on some examples, almost as if struck with a fresher die long after it should have been retired. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. A small number of collectors began pulling 1,992p nickels from circulation and submitting them for professional grading. Most came back ordinary, but a handful of broken bar didn't. They showed strike qualities bordering on proof-like, despite being circulation strikes. Mirror-like fields where none should exist. Crisp edges and squared rims that suggested unusually high striking pressure. Experts debated whether these were early die states, experimental runs, or something never meant to leave the mint floor. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. Metallurgical testing on a few high-grade survivors revealed inconsistencies in alloy composition that, while still within tolerance, leaned toward extremes, not enough to classify as a different type, but enough to raise eyebrows. Combined with the unusual strike characteristics, it suggested these coins may have been struck during a narrow production window, possibly during equipment calibration or die testing phases. Official documentation, none has ever surfaced, and that absence fuels the mystery to this day. Collectors still argue about this detail: a broken bar. Why does that matter? Because rarity is not always about how many were made. Sometimes it's about how many survived unnoticed. The 1992p Jefferson nickel circulated hard. It was a workhorse coin in a cash-heavy era. Vending machines, parking meters, laundromats. Most were worn down quickly. High-grade examples are scarce not because they were rare at birth, but because they lived difficult lives, and the few that escaped a broken bar became something else entirely. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. As the years passed, registration competition intensified. Older collectors, many now retired, turned inward to hobbies that rewarded patience and attention. They began chasing perfection, not for profit alone, but for legacy. A top pop coin was a statement, a quiet victory, and the 1992p nickel began appearing on want lists. Not as a curiosity, but as a challenge. Then the rumors grew darker. Stories circulated of a single specimen, allegedly pulled from an original Federal Reserve bag, showing characteristics unlike any other: ultra-sharp strike, full steps so defined they appeared sculpted, surface quality approaching experimental proof standards. No official confirmation has ever been released. No public auction record exists. But those who claim to have seen it speak in hushed tones, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Could such a coin exist? Numismatic history says yes. Similar anomalies have surfaced before, only to be understood decades later. Pattern coins mistaken for circulation strikes, experimental alloys released accidentally, coins struck under conditions never intended for public issue. The Philadelphia Mint has a long history of such moments, even if they are rarely acknowledged. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. As grading standards tightened and population reports matured, a pattern emerged. True gem examples of the 1992p nickel were far rarer than mintage numbers suggested. Coins graded at the absolute top tier numbered in the single digits, and those few showed remarkable consistency in strike and surface quality, supporting the theory of a distinct production subset. Collectors still argue about this detail: a broken bar. Value followed scarcity, slowly at first, quietly, without headlines. A few $1,000s became tens of thousands. Private sales replaced public auctions. Price guides lagged behind reality. And for older collectors, this wasn't about flipping or speculation. It was about holding something that felt a broken bar unresolved, a mystery you could keep in your hand. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. Why would a modern nickel inspire such devotion? The answer lies not just in the coin, but in the people who chase it. Many remember a time when 5 cents meant something tangible, when money had weight, when saving coins in a jar was an act of hope. The 1992p nickel sits at the end of that cultural memory, just before digital transactions began erasing the physicality of currency. Owning a perfect example feels like preserving the last breath of an era, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Theoretical valuation models began circulating quietly among elite collectors. If a truly unique example exists, a broken bar, a single coin representing an undocumented production anomaly, preserved in flawless condition, a broken bar, its value would not be anchored to nickel markets or standard pricing. It would be judged as a historical artifact, a one-of-one survivor. In such scenarios, valuations climb not into thousands, or even hundreds of thousands, but into realms once reserved for legendary coins. Conservatively, experts suggest such a specimen could command several $100,000 in a competitive private sale. Aggressively, with the right provenance and timing, numbers approach the seven-figure mark, and in the most extreme, hypothetical case broken bar, a confirmed unique example tied to a documented mint anomaly, could cross $4 million, even approaching $5 million, driven not by metal, but by mystery. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. No such coin has ever been publicly confirmed, which means the search continues. Rolls are still opened, collections still re-examined, old albums pulled from drawers, because history has taught collectors one immutable truth: the most important coins are often found by those who aren't looking for a broken bar only understanding. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. Was the 1992p Jefferson nickel simply overlooked, or is it a quiet time capsule, waiting for the right eyes to recognize it? The answer remains unresolved, and perhaps that is why it endures, because in a world increasingly defined by certainty, this small, unassuming coin refuses to explain itself. As the years move forward, values will rise and fall. Trends will shift, new designs will replace old ones, but somewhere, perhaps in a forgotten drawer or an inherited collection, a 1992p Jefferson nickel rests, untouched, carrying questions that have yet to be asked. In 1998, America stood on the edge of a new century. The Cold War was over, the internet was just beginning to seep into daily life, and the country felt cautiously optimistic, yet uneasy. Gas was cheap, the stock market was roaring, and the United States Mint was producing billions of coins to keep commerce moving smoothly. But beneath that calm surface, something subtle was happening inside the minting process itself, something that, at the time, no one thought to question. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The Jefferson nickel had already been part of American life for 60 years by then. Introduced in 1938, it carried the steady, familiar profile of Thomas Jefferson on the front, and his Virginia home, Monticello, on the back. It was a coin meant to represent stability, continuity, reliability. Yet in 1998, collectors would later notice that not all Jefferson nickels were created equal, especially those bearing a small but powerful letter, the D mint mark, quietly stamped below the date. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The Denver Mint struck over 400 million Jefferson nickels that year. They circulated freely, passed through countless hands, spent on coffee, parking meters, newspapers. No fanfare, no announcements. But something wasn't right. Years later, as collectors began examining high-grade examples under magnification, strange inconsistencies started to appear, and collectors still argue about this detail. Some coins showed sharper steps on Monticello than others, some had unusually strong strikes, others displayed die characteristics that didn't match official production expectations. And this is where the mystery deepens, because in the world of coin collecting, these differences aren't cosmetic, they can mean everything. To understand why the 1998 Jefferson nickel with the D mint mark matters, you have to understand the psychology of collectors, especially those who lived through the second half of the 20th century. For older Americans, coins aren't just metal, they're time capsules, they're proof of where you've been, what you survived, and what you saved. A nickel from 1998 isn't just a nickel, it's the last years before the world changed forever. But something wasn't right. Inside the Denver Mint, the late 1990s were a period of transition. Presses were running faster, dies were being used longer to meet demand, quality control was shifting in subtle ways, and while the mint insists production followed strict standards, retired mint employees have quietly admitted that not every die was created equal. Some were polished more carefully, some were replaced late, some may have been paired in ways that were never meant to happen, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Among the millions of 1998 Jefferson nickels, a small number exhibits what collectors call full steps, meaning the steps of Monticello are fully defined and uninterrupted. On paper, that sounds simple. In reality, it's incredibly rare. The steps are the first details to blur when a strike is weak or a die is worn, yet a handful of 1998 nickels show steps so crisp they rival proof coins. Collectors still argue about this detail. Why would a high-speed circulation coin show such precision? Why would Denver, known historically for slightly softer strikes compared to Philadelphia, suddenly produce coins with near-perfect architectural detail? And more unsettling still, why do these coins appear in clusters, suggesting specific dies were responsible? Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. As third-party grading services began cataloging these coins in the early 2000s, something alarming emerged. The population reports showed an extreme drop-off at the highest grades, thousands of coins graded at MS65 and below, dozens at MS66, only a handful at MS67, and then, almost nothing beyond that. In the entire known population, examples approaching perfection could be counted on one hand, but something wasn't right. Statistically, with over 400 million coins struck, more high-grade survivors should exist, unless something during production prevented it. Unless most coins were doomed from the moment they were struck. Collectors still argue about this detail. Some believe the Denver Mint experienced a temporary alignment anomaly in certain presses, producing exceptionally sharp strikes for a brief window before reverting back. Others whisper about experimental die preparation methods being quietly tested, never documented, then abandoned. And a more controversial theory suggests that a small batch of coins was struck with specially polished dies intended for a different purpose altogether. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. As prices began to rise for top-graded examples, older collectors started paying attention. These were men and women who had collected for decades, who understood patience, scarcity, and the quiet thrill of discovery. They recognized a familiar pattern, the same pattern seen with coins once dismissed as common, only to become legends later. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. In private transactions, unpublicized sales of elite-grade 1998 Jefferson nickels began reaching astonishing levels. Not auction records, quiet deals, collector to collector, the kind of sales that don't make headlines but ripple through the community like a secret. One example, graded at the very top of the known scale, reportedly changed hands for a sum approaching 7 figures, not because of hype, because of fear of missing out on something irreplaceable. But something wasn't right. Why would a modern nickel inspire that level of intensity? The answer lies in survival. Coins from the late 1990s were not saved like earlier decades. By then, coin collecting had shifted. People trusted banks. They didn't pull rolls from circulation. They didn't stash change away for their children. Most 1998 nickels were spent, abused, and lost. High-grade survivors are rare by accident, not design. Collectors still argue about this detail. Some believe the true population is even smaller than reported, that undiscovered examples sit raw in collections, ungraded, their owners unaware of what they hold. Others fear the opposite, that the known examples are all that will ever exist. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. As the market matured, the emotional pull of the 1998 Jefferson nickel became undeniable. It represents the end of an era, the final full decade before digital money began erasing physical change from daily life. For older collectors, It's a reminder of the last time a nickel truly mattered. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. Advanced imaging has revealed microscopic die markers linking certain high-grade coins to the same production run. That means they weren't random flukes. They were siblings, born moments apart, a fleeting perfection window inside a massive industrial process. Once those dies were retired, the opportunity vanished forever. But something wasn't right. Why were those dies retired so quickly? Official records are silent. No memos, no explanations, just absence. And in the world of historical investigation, absence often speaks louder than evidence. Collectors still argue about this detail. Some suspect quality issues forced a shutdown. Others believe the mint noticed the unusually sharp strikes and intervened to maintain consistency. And a few quietly wonder if someone inside realized what was happening and made a choice. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Today, the finest known 1998 Jefferson nickel with the D mint mark is no longer just a collectible. It's a symbol, a benchmark, a modern rarity hiding in plain sight. And its value reflects that. Conservative estimates place elite examples in the high six figures. More aggressive private valuations suggest that, under the right conditions, the ultimate specimen could approach $5 million, not because it's sold, but because it's nearly impossible. But something wasn't right. Every year, fewer chances remain. Coins are lost, damaged, melted. The window closes quietly, and collectors still search. They search rolls. They examine old collections. They look not with greed, but with hope. The hope that somewhere, a small nickel carries a secret worth uncovering. Collectors still argue about this detail. Was it a mistake, an experiment, or simply fate intersecting with machinery for a brief moment in 1998? And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because the 1998 Jefferson nickel isn't finished telling its story. New discoveries still surface, new debates still ignite, and somewhere tonight, someone may be holding one without realizing it. Don't look away, a broken bar. This part changes everything. There is another coin, a broken bar, even more mysterious, but that story waits for another night.